Veronica's Whisper is a collection of stories, my stories, and they're all true stories. I haven't embellished them to impress you. They're impressive enough on their own. And you might think, well, what's so special about her stories that would cause me to be interested in listening? My stories reside outside of the mundane. I have mystical experiences, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word. There's some ghost stories, there's some spirit visitation stories, and there's stories that are just simply unbelievable. So I invite you to suspend your own belief system and just journey with me through some of these stories. My hope is that you will revisit your stories in a different way, from a different perspective, with new eyes, with new hearing, and perhaps discover the magnificence in your stories as I have discovered the magnificence in mine. You know, I'll just start off by saying that I have written down my stories, and I've journaled for years. I've journaled my dreams and my visions and some of these experiences. So a few years ago, I drug all this stuff out of the boxes that they were stored in and decided that I would revisit some of these stories with new eyes. This resulted from an experience that I had several years ago. I was at my desk in my little home office in Wimberley, Texas. My husband and I own 2 lodging properties there, and I was working. I was just sitting there responding to some emails that I had received, some lodging inquiries. And I wasn't in some new agey place. I wasn't in some altered state. I was working. And I was composing an email to this lady who had inquired about one of our properties. And I suddenly, without forewarning, got a message. The message was given to me in my left ear. It was a voice that was outside of my head. It wasn't one of those little voices inside your head that says, now don't you do that. This was a message and a voice that I heard in my left ear. And this message was delivered with such urgency and such breathiness that I could actually feel the breath of the messenger on my left ear. And the message was this, and this is what it sounded like. Hear Veronica's whisper. Hear Veronica's whisper. Well, you can imagine I sat straight up in my chair and I looked all around. And of course, there's nothing there. I ran into the living room. My husband was reading the paper in the living room just outside of our office. And I ran in there and I said, did you hear that? And he said, hear what? Well, I recounted the experience to him. And he said to me, who's Veronica? Well, we stood there for a while and we tried to think of someone that I knew or that we both knew with the name Veronica. And we couldn't remember anybody that we ever knew by the name of Veronica. And then I thought, well, maybe it's someone who's died. Maybe somebody with the name Veronica has died and they're contacting me and they want me to listen to her. But we still couldn't ever remember ever knowing a person named Veronica. So I think this message that I received, it activated me to think that perhaps I need to revisit these stories in a different way. So that's why I drug out all this stuff and started re-looking at everything. And I got to thinking that these stories really mean something else altogether, something much grander than I ever imagined could be possible. In recounting these experiences from my earliest memories as a child to the present. When I was a child, I seemed to be able to hear and see things that other people couldn't see or hear. So I will recount some of these early stories to you now. And I'll also interject some little background stories that are rather mundane, but I include them because they represent how I defined myself from a child and on through the present. We lived in a big 2-story house on Ray Avenue in New Philadelphia, Ohio. And this was actually a house that my grandfather, Charlie, had built many, many years before. It was a big old house. I didn't know at that time that Charlie wasn't my real grandfather. He had married my grandmother. But he will show up in some subsequent stories. Certainly he has been with me from the time I was a little girl until the present. But anyway, we lived in this big old house, and my bedroom was upstairs. There was a bathroom upstairs. And it had all the original fixtures in the house, the old claw-footed tubs and the old big heavy porcelain sinks and so forth. And I never liked to use that bathroom upstairs. I just felt creepy when I went in there, like I wasn't alone in the bathroom. So we really, all of us, the whole family, took our baths downstairs in a bathroom off of the kitchen. And my mother was a stickler for a hot evening bath. And usually sometime after supper, after play was finished outside, I would come in, have supper, and my mother would draw a nice hot bath for me. And I would go in the bathroom and undress and ease myself down into the bathtub. And I suppose I was about 4 years old. Before I could commence with the bath part of this experience, I had important work to do. And when I would ease myself into the water, all these little gnats that had collected on me from outside, playing outside, would start floating in the water. And my little conscience just could not abide a bath when there was rescuing to be done. So I would set about rescuing each one of these little gnats, and I would pick them up one at a time in my cupped palm, and I would take my finger and I would scoop them up, being very, very careful not to injure them. And they're all unconscious. They're not conscious or flying or trying to fly. And I would line them up on the edge of the bathtub. And sometimes I would have 20 or 25 gnats lined up on the side of the bathtub. And when I had rescued all of them in the water around me, I would just blow my breath on them. And I would continue blowing, and they would come to life, and they would perch themselves up on their little legs, and they would, move their wings a little bit. And I can't tell you what joy it brought me, overwhelming joy, to see these little gnats come back to life. And I would swear to you that they spoke to me, and they would say something like, "Thank you." And I would say something like, "You're welcome." Actually, I think what I said was, "I'm so glad that you're alive." So my next story is a story about a very larger-than-life raven. And I hope you continue watching. And it is my fervent prayer and hope that you will revisit your own story with new eyes and suspend maybe some old tired belief systems that you have about your past, about things that have happened to you that aren't quite so pleasant. I'll address that later. And I hope that you journey your own story in a different way and discover the magnificence of your own story as I've discovered mine. Thanks for watching.